we got some people coming in. Oh, just you and me. All right. Attendees. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
If you will mute yourself, that would be great. Just letting folks in. Thanks for being here this morning.
It keeps asking me to unmute, Amy. Is that right? It's Susie.
Hey, Susie. No, you should be all right.
Okay, I'll mute myself back.
Thank you. We've got a big crowd coming in, so just hang with us. Thank you all for being here so far. We still have 1 minute till 10, so we'll give it one more minute. Or 2 or 3, maybe. While we're waiting, if you would like to put your contact information in the chat, we can go ahead and allow people to make connections that way if you would like to. If you are not on mute, if you're in a phone call in, if you're not on mute, would you please mute yourself so we don't get feedback? All right, we're just now at 10. I'm going to give it just another couple of minutes. Got a lot coming in. Awesome. All right. Thank you all for being here. It's about 2 after. Let's give it 1 more minute. Let people log in. Sometimes it's last minute, I know. Yes. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. I think we have most everyone in here. My name is Amy Jackson. Thank you all so much for being a part of this, our last SMART series of our fiscal year through the end of June. Chad Whittemore, did you make it on here? I don't think he's going to be able to. It was a last minute deal for him. Chad Whittemore is with First Citizens Bank, our presenting sponsor for our SMART series. And I just want to say thank you to them. They're always such a generous sponsor for chamber events, particularly our SMART series. They are working tirelessly for business in the community, making sure they have available resources to those that might need it. If you have any needs, you can get in touch with Chad. I will put his information in the chat as well. And yes, thank you very much. Now I want to introduce Chris Cavanaugh from Magellan Strategy Group, who is going to give us just sort of a rundown of things that are going on in the hospitality industry, what's been going on lately as in with COVID, and even as some events of last week, just general information about what we can work on and try to expect in the coming months, even year. So thank you, Chris. I'll let you have the floor.
Great. Thank you very much, Amy, and thanks for everyone for attending this presentation. A couple things I want to say before we get started. I agreed to do this as I usually do about a year ago when Amy asked me to do it this time. And so it's been on the calendar for a year. The world is obviously a much different place than it was 1 year ago when I agreed to do this. And in fact, is a much different place just this year in 2020, and even much different place from 2 weeks ago. And we actually had, I was going to do a traditional changing demographics presentation up until a couple of weeks ago. And Amy asked me if I could talk a little bit about hospitality and tourism. And I'm going to do that today. And I'm going to share a presentation with you. Go ahead and share my screen. Oh, I think Amy, you may have to allow me to do that.
Sure, absolutely. Make sure. Yes. Okay, how about that?
Let's check. Nope, it's still saying it's disabled.
Yes, okay, I can do it. Where is the... Go ahead and chat us up and I will...
Okay. You know, this is obviously a time of great uncertainty. And what I'm going to share with you today represents a little bit about where we've been over the last few months, where we are now, and where I believe that we're headed. And a lot of what you'll see today applies broadly to the world, to total US, and to North Carolina. But there are a great number of implications for Asheville as well. And I'm excited to share some of that with you. And great, we're good. That works, Amy. So let's go ahead and pull that up. Terrific.
Awesome.
So there's really, today you'll see that there are three different sections of this presentation, where we've been, as I mentioned, where we are now, and where I think we're headed over the next few weeks and months, with the caveat that that's obviously subject to change as well. Anyone who's seen a presentation from me, traditionally at the SMART series presentation series, knows that I usually share this slide because I love sharing lots and lots of information. So I apologize that this is going to be a bit like drinking from a fire hose at times, but bear with me and we'll get through this. I think there's a lot of information here that's very relevant to our situation here in Asheville. So the first thing I want to do is, in terms of talking about where we've been, I want to share some information with you that I worked last week to help a friend of mine with a company called Uber Media. His name is Evan Saunders. He did a webinar for the Economic Development Partnership of North Carolina, which also houses Visit NC. And in talking about this presentation, Evan worked for Uber Media, which is not associated with Uber, the rideshare company. It's a company that does mobile traffic data. And it's really, I thought it was really fascinating to look at this information to see how our traffic patterns have changed over the last 3 months, now going on 4 months. And I want to show you a little bit about this. Uber Media collects and aggregates mobile location data that comes via smartphone applications. And most of us have location-enabled apps on our phone. This information is collected using these apps, everything from weather.com to Words with Friends to Google Maps, anything that you have a location sharing app turned on your phone. All of this data is anonymous and then is aggregated by Uber Media for different applications. What they do is they take these raw mobile data and then try to answer questions, if you will, that their clients have. They have data on up to 14 trillion location observations across the United States and the world. In fact, 1 billion data from 1 billion monthly global devices, 4+ years of historic data, and again, it's all anonymous data. And they work with a lot of different retailers, a lot of different brands, and work with a lot of those companies. They also work with a number of tourism entities around the U.S. And I've started using some of their information in some of the work that I do already to better understand patterns of mobility in communities and destinations. So let's look first at foot traffic by sector in terms of looking back at where we've been and sort of quantifying the lifting of stay-at-home orders on consumer behavior. And Uber Media has a library of 1.5 million points of interest that they pull and can look at foot traffic, if you will, at all these different places. Now, by foot traffic, that's not necessarily just literally feet on the street, because it could include cars and drive-throughs and any number of other places where we go as consumers, as employees, as guests. And again, it's all done anonymously. So if we look here, they've compiled basically beginning in early March through the 1st of June. They've compiled this 7-day moving average. And if we look at let's look at first this period from early March in terms of foot traffic. And again, this is using mobile location data, so our smartphones, if you will. You can see that if we use an index of 100, roughly at around March 6th, March 7th, March 8th, that was sort of our normal period, if you will, right before we got into this madness. On March 10th, Governor Cooper declared a state of emergency, closed public schools on March 14th, and then on March 30th, there was a statewide stay-at-home order that took effect. You can see how much foot traffic declined, pedestrian and motorist traffic declined, and actually didn't bottom out in the state of North Carolina until about the 3rd week of April, which is really interesting. You can see here this point, we had a slight bump on the day before Easter, which is interesting to note, maybe increased number of people going out to grocery stores. We'll actually look at this by different types of business here in a second. So let's just break this down a little bit further. You see here, this is the period of stay at home. And then on May 8th, Governor Cooper announced that we could enter into our first phase of reopening, which is when retail stores could open with limitations. But note that even before May 8th, after we bottomed out sometime in mid to late April, note that actually foot traffic was increasing in the state of North Carolina. And we saw some bump in terms of traffic at that point, but we actually had been reaching a point where a little bit more normal in terms of, and if you think about this, it makes sense. If you think about, we bottomed out even in terms of just anecdotally looking at traffic around Asheville, for instance, began to return to some sort of more stabilized normalcy beginning here in late April, going into early May. The next period was obviously phase 2 of reopening, which began this May 8th period when retail stores could open with limitations. And I guess actually that was phase one. Phase two began May 22nd, when we began to see right before Memorial Day that stay-at-home orders were lifted further, and we could see personal care businesses like salons, restaurants, other businesses like restaurants opening at 50% capacity. But again, we still don't see a massive increase in foot traffic necessarily. And we'll talk about why that is a little bit shortly. So let's look at this by different types of businesses. So again, let's break this down by each of the stages of the pandemic. We look here in early March, and you can see here we have several different types of businesses. And this is their foot traffic index. Well, 100% would be normal, but we had businesses even in compared to where we are now, several different types of businesses that were experiencing above normal traffic. And we even had this big spike here. You see there's a big spike, for instance, in salons and spas, for instance, and entertainment facilities. It was like all of a sudden we realized, oh my God, we've got to go get our hair cut because that's going to be the next thing to go. And sure enough, it was. You can see obviously after early March, how much foot traffic at each one of these business types declined. The one exception here is grocery stores, which actually saw this huge uptick in traffic from early March as we rushed out to buy essentials and, of course, particularly toilet paper. But even traffic then began to decline greatly and bottomed out here around the third week of April, which is when we saw during this lockdown, when we saw all traffic sort of bottom out here around the 20th of April in terms of foot traffic. And you see the different types of businesses that were affected. Now let's go into the first phase of reopening and the second phase of reopening. And you see, again, some businesses began to return to normal. Most notable here is that we begin to see traffic increase for salons and spas, even in advance of reopening. And what that most likely represents is workers going back to prepare those businesses for reopening. And then obviously, as we get into Memorial Day weekend, when we could all begin going to get haircuts again, we saw a continued increase here. We see increases here also in in apparel stores, which is the blue line there. Which was when, again, on May 8th, Governor Cooper allowed retail stores to reopen with restrictions. And we all, in addition to running out and getting haircuts, we all ran out and apparently bought clothes. So there's definitely indication that there's some pent-up demand as these types of businesses began to reopen, even in the latter stages of the lockdown. So let's look more specifically at tourist activity. Uber Media, the company that provides this data, has compiled a list of 75 different types of quote-unquote tourist attractions across the state of North Carolina, some of which are located in Buncombe County, to look at the aggregate impact of these different attractions to see how they were impacted. And some are just parks, if you will. Some are gated attractions. Some are amusement parks. Some are historic sites. Some are everything like places like Navatat here in Asheville, for instance. So we have a variety of different attraction types represented here. Again, we break it down using, if we use 100 as our index when things were normal, if you will, here's the pre-COVID period. And we actually began to see a decline in these types of businesses a little bit. This is actually going back to the very 1st of January. So if we use January 1 as our normal period, we see a little bit of a decline during the winter, as we do at many attractions in these types of businesses and parks, greatly affected by weather, obviously. And we began to see coming into the spring, coming into March, a little bit of growth here as we do every year. But then obviously the bottom fell out. And you can see here that the bottom just completely tanked here. And again, by the end of March, all of these businesses were greatly affected. And then by, certainly again, by the third week of April, we reached our bottom point for these types of tourist-related attractions and businesses. You see some recovery here beginning on May 8th, which is the period of time when Governor Cooper began phase 1 of reopening. And we see some recovery, but not in the aggregate a lot of recovery. We still have a long ways to go, again, because of the different reopening periods that we're in, different protocols. Now, this is a spaghetti chart, I realize, doesn't make a whole lot of sense on it looking at its own, but what they did here, this is the impact of 75, this is the lines representing all 75 different attractions. And you can see most of these continue to remain down here at the bottom. This goes from about April 1st to June 1st. You can see here that most of these continue to remain closed or in very sluggish states of reopening. But then we've got this cluster of attractions and attraction-related businesses that have these big spikes. So let's look a little closely at these. And these represent a number of, and again, we're using a moving average index, if you will, of foot traffic going back to the first of the year. We actually have a couple of these in our own backyard. First of all, this green spike here is Umstead State Park, which is right outside of Raleigh, very popular urban state park. And on May 8th, you can see just how badly people wanted to get out into the outdoors. I mean, visitation to these type of natural attractions soared. If you look at this Bearden Park, which is this line here, that's that purple line here going across here. That's an urban park in the middle of downtown Charlotte. So we see some increase, but again, with so many people working from home, there's just in Charlotte, many fewer people there. Grandfather Mountain had a phased reopening here in phase 2, and you can see here some increase in activity here, a little bit of a drop, and then a slow and steady increase. And then let's look at Biltmore. That's that light green line here. Biltmore announced during the phase 1 reopening that pass holders could come onto the state with reservations, and you can see again just how badly pass holders wanted to be on the property. Now this also includes employees of Biltmore as well. And then they announced their gradual reopening to guests, to non-pass holder guests, on Memorial Day weekend. And again, you can see here the spike in activity from both guests of Biltmore and from employees. Charlotte Motor Speedway is this black line right here, and they returned to racing over Memorial Day weekend without fans, but again, obviously a big spike here in activity relative to where they were relative to where they were in the rest of the pandemic. So let's just look at Umstead, that big spike there. Again, that's the state park located right outside of Raleigh, very popular. And they compared where people were coming for Umstead. And you can see here that people were in May of 2019, 79% lived within 50 miles away. 88% of people were from North Carolina. You can compare that to May of 2020, much more likely to live within 50 miles away. No surprise there, much more likely to be from within North Carolina, and 10% were from within the zip code that includes Umstead. Then lastly, I'll show you this. This is interesting also, again, using the 75 different tourist locations. You can see the differences here between where we were in 2020, where we were in May 2020, this past month, in terms of where visitors came from versus where they were coming from in 2019. Obviously, very few international visitors. And this again uses what they call a common evening location. Basically, where do you lay your head at night for most nights during the year to establish whether you're local, in-state, a domestic from outside of North Carolina, or an international visitor. And you can see again how much it's declined in terms of domestic visitation, from 41% of visitor to Umstead last year were from outside of North Carolina, but in the U.S., to only about 31% this year. So a little bit about where we are now. Just to give you some high-level overview, I'm going to show you some research here that is relatively recent that I think will give you some idea as to where we are now and where I think we're going to be headed in our final stage of a presentation. I think slowly but steadily increasing consumer confidence about travel, but only certain kinds of travel. There are some types of travel that are going to be very, very slow to rebound, if at all, certainly within the next 12 to 24 months. I think that we will see many people are willing to travel, and they're taking baby steps at first. Day trips, visiting friends and family are going to be big drivers for the near future for all of travel, not just Asheville, but for all of travel. Interestingly, more travelers seem to be concerned about the health risk of travel rather than their own personal finances. And I think there's a couple of reasons for that. Obviously, there's a huge number of people out of work right now, even in our own community, especially in our own community. And I think that what we're seeing here is that travel, as always, is one of the first and most powerful things that people want to spend money on. If they have money, no money to spend on, if they have money only to spend, discretionary income to only spend on a few things, they want to spend it on travel experiences. Now, that may be with visiting friends and family and staying in their homes. It may be for day trips, but the health risk of travel seems to be dominating their concerns rather than their own personal finances for most people. I think this fall season looks promising for now. Summer, unfortunately, still looks kind of meh. I'm still concerned about summer. I think we're going to see a very slow recovery. People are more optimistic about fall than they are about summer, but there is still some optimism for summer. And a couple of final things here. We're getting excited about our own personal travel prospects. But to be honest, we're not very excited about welcoming people into our communities. I'll talk more about that here shortly. We want to get out and travel and go visit friends and family. We're not crazy about welcoming people into our communities, although that's improving. And the caveat, of course, is that this is all subject to change tomorrow or even this afternoon. We obviously live in an extremely fast-paced, fast-changing environment. And even as I talk now, very concerned about the increasing number of hospitalizations for COVID in North Carolina and some of our surrounding states. I'm going to show you some research that comes primarily from two companies here. Destination Analyst, which has done a very good job of providing research on a weekly basis, and H2R Market Research, which is focused a lot on consumer confidence and specifically travel activities and attractions. Most of this research was taken from surveys during the week of Memorial Day, so that week right after Memorial Day weekend. So Destination Analyst asked the question, in the next month, how much, if at all, do you expect the severity of the coronavirus situation in the U.S. to change? And we now see that only about a third of travelers expect things to get worse. And that was actually an improvement from the prior week, where it was at 37%. But we're also not seeing many travelers expecting things to get better. That number continues to be about the same. And so we're sort of in this holding pattern right now, if you will. The blue here represents the percentage of people expecting things to get better or much better. And you can see we bottomed out there in the early part of April. Most people weren't expecting things to get better at all in the next month or so, and they were right. Most people expected things to be very bad, and they were right also in the month of April. We see the percentage of people who feel optimistic about things getting better, about it getting worse, declining, but we're not seeing a corresponding increase in the number of people who think it's going to get better. We're just sort of in this holding pattern right now. And I think that represents a lot of the uncertainty that we're seeing across the U.S. About everything from the political situation to racial discourse and conversation to the economy. And so there's just a lot of uncertainty right now. It's interesting, though, that people have, in general, become much more comfortable with opening their home state economy. And again, there's obviously going to be great differences across the U.S. This is total U.S. So we've gone in early May from 35% feeling that they agree with being comfortable with their home state reopening their economy to, by the end of May, being 47%, almost half of people saying that they're comfortable with home state reopening their economy. Now, again, this is totally U.S. Tremendous variation across the U.S. in terms of comfort level. And you can see here that the percentage of people who disagree with that statement is actually declining as well. So we're beginning to feel better about reopening. But again, I'll point out that could change, particularly with the increasing rate of hospitalizations in a number of U.S. states. I thought this was interesting also. Destination analyst asked a question. Imagine that a good friend or close family member asked you to take a weekend getaway with them sometime in the next month. How excited would you be to go, assuming the getaway is to a place you want to visit? And it's on a 0 to 10 scale, with 0 being not at all excited and 10 being extremely excited. And the number of people who indicate that they're excited in some degree has actually gone up pretty sharply by the end of May, from 45% to 58%. So that's a good sign. Again, we're feeling better about our personal willingness and personal situation to want to travel. You can see that the percentage of people who are not excited has declined substantially over the last few weeks, going back to early March. The percentage of people who have said that they are not excited has declined substantially, while the percentage of people who say they're excited has climbed quite a lot. So that's a good sign. People, again, are feeling more optimistic about their own personal travel. Ask the question about how excited are you in learning about new, exciting travel experiences or destinations to visit? Quite frankly, most of us weren't excited about it for a very long time. Destination Analyst again shows us good news that it's up within 1 week at the end of May, over Memorial Day weekend, from 39% to 52% in terms of how excited we are. And again, tremendous probably differences in terms of demographics and where people live. When it comes to getting back out and traveling again, which best describes your current state of mind? 6% of people say that they're already traveling. Another 14% of people say that they're ready to travel with no hesitation. So that's about a fifth of American travelers who say that they're ready to get out and travel or are already doing so. A good sign. Obviously 20% is a low number, and there's obviously also a lot of people that still feel some hesitation about travel. Now, I mentioned before that travel is going to slowly come back. It's slowly starting to come back, but that's not true for all types of travel. This shows the percentage of people who, in the gray bar, who think that it is very unsafe to do these activities, and the percentage of people in the blue bar who think it's somewhat unsafe. We do not want to get on cruise ships right now at all, and that's going to be a huge black mark against the cruise industry, I think, for a very long time. We don't want to do intercity bus travel, which I think is a real concern, even though this points out things like Greyhound and Megabus. I think this is a real concern for the tour bus industry, group tour. We in Asheville has historically done very well with group tours, even though that's been a declining part of the Asheville destination mix for a while. We still feel very uncomfortable about large venue sporting events. We feel very uncomfortable about traveling outside of the U.S. Down here, though, I want you to focus on this. We're beginning to feel better about certain activities, non-team outdoor recreation. And obviously, that's a good thing for Asheville. That's one thing that Asheville and Western North Carolina do very well. We generally feel, as American travelers, very good about that. We feel good about taking a road trip, not getting on an airplane or not getting on a Greyhound bus or a train. We feel very good about visiting friends and relatives generally. Feel good about going shopping. That's improving as well. And beginning to feel better about staying in a hotel, although there's still about 45% of people who think that that's unsafe in some regard. we asked the question, or destination analysts asked the question, how much do you agree with the following statement? Because of the coronavirus, I'll probably be taking more regional trips near my home and I'll avoid long haul travel. And from early March to where we are now, that number's gone from about 43% agreement to 51%. So a little, some increase there in terms of likelihood to take more regional trips, which I do think speaks well for Asheville because we've traditionally been a regional destination. Now, I mentioned about fall, and for a while, we actually saw a decline in the percentage of people who expect to be traveling in the fall. We actually saw that bottom out in terms of the percentage of people who agreed or strongly agreed. People actually felt better about traveling in the fall in early April, but as the situation has dragged on, felt worse about their prospects in the autumn. That's picked up, back up though. People are beginning to feel a little bit better about fall. Again, I think this indicates that there are a lot of travelers that do want to get out there and do things. They're just waiting for some cues to be able to do that. Question, I feel comfortable going out in my community to restaurants, local attractions, and undertaking local activities. We felt really good about this early on, actually, in early March, but then obviously things changed dramatically after that. The lockdown occurred. We went into a fairly deep recession, even a depression potentially. That's beginning to happen now where we're feeling better about going out in our community, but we still only see about a third of American travelers even feeling good about that, continuing to be concerned about their own personal health and finances. What types of travel experiences would you find most relaxing? And I'll point this out because I think this is very consistent with what I've seen elsewhere. Spending time visiting friends or family at 43%, taking a road trip 35%, and beach destinations. I do think beach destinations appear to be leading the recovery out of the doldrums here, and beach destinations, the ones I've seen reported on and the ones I've heard about anecdotally, appear to be doing very well. I think because of the perception of safety of social distancing at beach resorts and beach destinations. And then this question about, even if only tentatively scheduled, in which months of this year do you currently plan to take any leisure trips? And I thought this was interesting. Right now, only 26% of American travelers say they have no plans to travel in 2020. And 13% of people said they plan to travel in 2021 instead. Again, there's a lot of people that are looking for cues, looking for it to be okay to want to travel. And we'll talk about a little bit about what they're looking for here next. You've heard a lot about the new normal. And in general, American travelers believe it's going to take us another 3/4 of a year to reach the new normal, 35 weeks to reach that new normal, which I think probably fits well with the amount of time when there's an expectation that perhaps, hopefully, we'll have better treatments and even potentially a vaccine that's being tested or even in place 35 weeks from now. So it's still an expectation. It's going to take a while to get to that new normal, if you will, where we're comfortable on a regular basis being able to travel. There is still a lot of opportunity for persuading travelers' decisions. And this comes from H2R research, market research. If destinations and attractions can position their messages in an appropriate way. And there are a lot of people here that they surveyed when asked, do you already have an idea of where you will take your next leisure trip? 44% of people said, yeah, I have an idea where I want to go, but it's not set in stone yet. I'm still not sure where I want to do something, but I'm still not sure exactly what I'm going to do when I get there. Only 21% of people here, and again, this is consistent with that last slide, said that they don't intend to take a leisure trip anytime soon. But people are researching, they're still in the consideration set of wanting to travel, but it's not set in stone for many people. Only 17% of travelers say, yeah, I know where I'm going and nothing's going to change my mind. You may have seen this earlier in the week. I thought this was interesting. This is a story in the New York Times, I believe, that they interviewed 511 epidemiologists on when they personally expect to fly, hug, and do 18 other everyday activities again. And, you know, even this summer, 56% of these epidemiologists said that they would be okay with vacationing overnight within driving distance. Those are the kinds of cues that a lot of Americans want to feel good about. If epidemiologists, even over half of those folks say, yeah, they'd be okay personally with vacationing overnight within driving distance, those are the kinds of cues that people are looking for, those kinds of reassurances that people are looking for. One of the other big cues is, of course, governance. And we have a patchwork of different governance across this U.S. We have states that are in localities that are in many different states of reopening. And 45% of American travelers say that they're looking to those new governance rules. Only 33% say that a discount is the thing that's going to motivate them to travel. So they're looking for reassurance that it's okay to travel from authorities. Now this gets confusing. Let's take our own personal situation here in Buncombe County. We have one set of orders that's coming from Governor Cooper and the Department of Health and Human Services in Raleigh with regards to the lockdown. We have another set of orders that has been put in place by Buncombe County. And even within Buncombe County, we have disagreement about those orders, about the extent of those orders, say within the community of Weaverville, which voted to opt out of mandatory mask wearing, which Buncombe County had voted on earlier in May. So we have this patchwork, and consumers and travelers are obviously very confused because it varies so much from state to state, from county to county, and even within the county. So I think that confusion is going to hold people back for a while. We've even had localities within Western North Carolina, like Graham County, for instance, that shut down for a long time entirely to visitors. You had to own a home or be a full-time resident of Graham County to get into Graham County for a while. And so we have this a lot of confusion now, and it's hard to even find good information for travelers. So we've got to do a better job, hopefully, of resolving some of this confusion and providing information. Now, I mentioned that we personally are very excited about our opportunities for travel. We're very interested in it generally, but we're not crazy about having travelers coming to visit our own community. And this is information from Destination Analysts that they've been tracking, which I found very interesting. That shows the level of agreement with the statement, I do not want travelers coming to visit my community right now. Now, the good news is that that percentage is improving. In mid-April, 2/3 of us said, I agree or strongly agree with the statement, I don't want people coming in to visit my community. It's down to about 55%, but that again shows that over half of Americans don't want people coming to visit their community. So we've got to do a better job, hopefully, of sending out visual cues that, yes, either we're willing to welcome travelers, who take precautions, wear masks, whatever the local guidance is with regards to travel. We're seeing improvement here, but a lot of us still, and again, this is going to vary from community to community and state to state. I imagine quite a bit. So here's where I think we're headed and my thoughts on planning for it here in Asheville and elsewhere. I think we're going to see a slow recovery in Asheville this summer, followed by a better fall. Again, assuming that we don't see a massive explosion in cases. I am very concerned about the rise in hospitalizations, not only here in Western North Carolina, but across the state of North Carolina, also in some of our neighboring states that we draw visitors from. I think if we do see visitation demand is going to be generated by regional drive traffic, there probably will be some continued growth in air travel in late summer and into fall. I thought it was interesting that actually the air carrier that appears to be coming back the fastest is Allegiant, which has a very large presence at the Asheville Regional Airport. They are actually now at a point where they're close to 85% of their nationally of their pre-COVID schedule. So They're seeing some optimism, obviously, in terms of their bookings, but I think we'll see some growth in air travel, particularly in late summer and into the fall. Again, assuming that all continues to stabilize or improves. I think the things that are going to drive visitation for Asheville are, as I mentioned before, outdoor activities, spending time with family and friends, and more intimate experiences. Not necessarily big group gatherings, big events, and so forth, being in crowds. And we're lucky because past visitors generally do have a very deep emotional connection with this area. And I think that helps us a lot. We're not trying we have many people who have fond memories of visiting Western North Carolina, and that's going to help, I think, drive visits here when the time is right. One of the big factors, I want to talk about a handful of big factors here, is this idea of sense of personal control. And I think personalized experiences and intimate experiences are going to be a big driver for us in the near future, for those of us in the travel and tourism and hospitality sectors. This idea of providing a sense of personal control, where I, as a traveler, as a visitor, am in some control, have a great deal of control over my personal surroundings. And I want to show you an example. Las Vegas has always done a great job of pivoting. They pivoted after 9/11. They pivoted more recently to promoting live music and entertainment experiences that you can only get in Las Vegas. And they've pivoted now, and some of you may have seen in the last week or two, this is a new ad for Las Vegas. They're changing course again, and again, emphasizing intimate experiences and personal control. So I'm going to play this 30-second ad for you.
The world has changed, and Vegas is changing with it. So yes, things will be a little different when we open again. At least for a while. And the need for the best will be available. We're working to make it more intimate. More space. And the excitement is actually there. So if you ever imagine Vegas just for you, it's almost there. And when it's right, you'll be the first to know.
Now, many of you know that Las Vegas reopened this past week. There were unfortunately a lot of people not wearing masks in casinos and so forth. You will note in that ad that there were no more than 2 or 3 people in each shot. Now, that's a big change for Las Vegas from how they've traditionally positioned themselves. That's also not sustainable for Las Vegas. Las Vegas has to have meetings and conventions come back. It has to have large numbers of people come back for concerts and sporting events. But that's what they're pushing right now, is these intimate experiences. I think a lot of this goes back to something I'm fond of talking about. If you go back to thinking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we have to take care of these basic physiological needs and our safety needs first before we can self-actualize. And my good friends at PGAV Destinations refashioned this into the travel industry and the attraction industry a few years ago, and put it in terms of consumers' hierarchy of needs. That we've got to take care of our safety, comfort, and understanding first before we can seek out inspiring experiences, transforming experiences. So that's why that's going to be very important. That we provide for information about how consumers can stay safe, how our travelers and visitors can stay safe. Conventions and conferences will likely continue to be in the doldrums for a while. Again, because of the lack, certainly because of the financial situation for many companies and travelers, but also because of the lack of control over my personal circumstances. And we still see that 73% of travelers agree or strongly agree that they're unlikely to attend any conferences or conventions until the coronavirus situation is resolved. What are people looking for, though? They want to stay safe from infection. They're seeking emotional well-being, finding joy or happiness, relaxation, and escape from stress. And note, though, that these 4 things right here, emotional well-being, finding joy, relaxation, and escape from stress, in terms of being a high priority, are high, but they're not as high as the combined high priority and essential priority of staying safe from infection. So that's the first priority for consumers. We've got to get there first before we can provide these other things to travelers. We live in a very stressful time, and people do want to take a vacation. 48%, almost half of travelers say they agree or strongly agree that a vacation would help them manage the stress in their life. So they want a vacation. They want that very much. A few of the things that I've seen going on that I think are worth noting in terms of what people are going to be looking for. The #1 most viewed cable network during the pandemic is HGTV, and many of us have been spending our time watching HGTV shows. This idea that I do want to improve my personal surroundings, improve my life, the life of my family. We're seeing a lot of that reflected through that. This is also reflected in the huge number of donations going to places like Habitat Restore and Goodwill. As we clean out our homes during the pandemic to improve them, I get a laugh out of the fact that here's a woman who's donating this sign that says family after spending the last 3 months in quarantine with her family. Obviously, she's tired of her family and doesn't want any more reminders of it. But people are looking to improve their own personal lives. They're still looking for that. Another very widely viewed network, cable network, has been the Food Network. People still want to eat out. They're still interested in traveling to explore new dining experiences, but they, again, have to feel safe about those things. I want to talk briefly before wrapping up about the events of the last 2 weeks in the United States and here in Asheville. I think this is certainly a call for those of us in travel and tourism and hospitality to continue to create more inclusive and welcoming experiences. And it's interesting that I talked about this a year ago at a presentation for Explore Asheville Convention and Visitors Bureau, some market research that had been produced by H2R Market Research, one of the partners I work with frequently, in their 2019 Voice of the Visitor research. And they showed that minority groups accounted for 21% of attraction visitation in 2018, but they composed 39% of the US population. This is not just Black Americans, but also all people of color. And yet, so we have this big gap between the number of people participating in travel experiences who are people of color versus the percentage of people that they represent in the population. And there's reasons for that. They are less likely to travel for leisure. 76% of minority travelers versus 84% of white Americans. They're less satisfied with their last attraction experience. 76% of them, of Blacks and people of color, other people of color, were satisfied with their last attraction experience versus 89% of Caucasians. Less likely to recommend their last attraction to friends and family. And we have largest disparities in attraction type attendance are in historic landmarks and places and breweries and wineries. Those are certainly causes for concern for those of us here in Asheville. We've got to do a better job of making minority travelers feel welcome, particularly even before the events of the last couple of weeks, but particularly going forward. It's very important as we begin our reopening that we really re-examine how we're doing in terms of welcoming minority travelers. The last thing I want to talk about is something that is certainly very important to the Chamber and very important to me personally, and that's the threat to small business. We have seen a tremendous amount of federal aid programs at the national level, but all of these programs have not made it down to all small businesses that need them. We've seen already over 100,000 small businesses nationally that have closed permanently. That's no doubt going to go up, will continue to rise. Some economists estimated a month ago that 2% of all small businesses have failed, and already maybe as many as 3% of restaurants, and that was a month ago. I do think that the rules passed last week by Congress and signed into effect by the president that will boost the flexibility of the federal aid programs, particularly the PPP lending, will help small businesses a great deal. But the longer this drags on and the slower the recovery, it's certainly a concern. It's interesting, too, that this is coming on the heels of something that is already a concern for those of us in the travel and tourism sector. We were already seeing a lot of baby boomers who were quitting business and retiring without having a transition plan in place, and that was prior to the pandemic. And this transition is something that's of great concern to me because of the number of small businesses that are owned by baby boomers. And the question is now, is our millennials ready to fill the gaps? Do they have the resources needed, both financial and the skills needed to fill those gaps? And that's, I think, going to be a big point of emphasis. And I have to think about, for those of us in Asheville, what does the destination experience look like without these small businesses? So anything that we can do to continue to support and advocate for those programs for small businesses, I think is vital. So just a few things, one last slide to wrap up here. A few things that you can do to, I think, one, look at your own target audiences. Your loyal customers are the people that you need to be reaching out to right now. Continue to build, rebuild, and curate your network of loyal customers. Stay in touch with them, because quite frankly, there are businesses looking to poach from your network of loyal customers. They need customers as well. Look at what was driving demand before the pandemic hit. Of those demand drivers, what's going to be the fastest to return? What's going to be the slowest to return? If you have a business that was very dependent upon aging baby boomers or senior citizens, that may be very slow to return because of their concern about health risk. What's going to motivate your customers to return? It may be safety and minimizing risk first before anything like a discount. Look at your messaging in media. Is it on target? Is it appropriate for this time of year? Are you showing large groups of people in your messaging? Look at how you're reaching your target consumers. Focus your resources on your strengths. Make sure during this time period that your message is not watered down. What do you do well, and how does that meet with what consumers and visitors are looking for? Identify possible new markets. I think that there's a number of new opportunities out there for both local residents as well as visitors, offering more intimate experiences, customized travel experiences. Contactless payment was already a big trend going into 2020, is going to obviously pick up speed. And then finally, monitor, adapt, and proceed with caution. This is a very changeable environment. I'm certainly, again, very concerned about the increasing rate of hospitalizations due to COVID in North Carolina and elsewhere, but continue to monitor, be very flexible with your messaging and media, and proceed with caution. You can find this, there's an infographic here that's on my website. You'll see several blogs that I've written that I've started writing during the pandemic, and you'll find this about 6 steps for planning a post-COVID marketing recovery on my website. So thank you very much for the time today. I greatly appreciate it. Amy, I'd be happy to make the presentation available to anyone who wants it, if they want to send the emails to you, or however you want to handle that.
Sure. If you want to, yes, thank you, Chris. That was so informative, such good information, statistics, and it's interesting to hear how other people are thinking, not just in our community, but outside of our community, what their thoughts are about traveling and coming back to us, and how we can expect to experience hospitality going forward. Yes, if you're interested in Chris's presentation, you're welcome to send either Chris information. Chris, go back to your screen where your information was on it, the last one, if you will, please. Or you can send an email to me at the chamber. Either one would be great. We'll let him put that
I will do that.
Yeah.
It's MagellanStrategy.com is my website, and just look for my blog, and you'll see this particular infographic on my blog. And I'm happy. I'll try to post the presentation to my website as well.
That would be great. Yeah, thank you. Great. Thank you all. Thank you all so much. Again, Chris, that was super interesting. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I hope all of you did. If there's anything the chamber can do for any of you, don't hesitate to reach out to us. We are here to help and make sure our community thrives in the near and distant future. Thank you all. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you, everyone. Stay safe. Bye-bye.
Thank you.